Hello and welcome back to another lovely video. As you've already surmised, I've managed to complete the Herculean task of making a video not about Lancer, at the meager price of infecting this channel with Warhammer content. I'm not sorry. Don't worry, this won't be a full-scale introduction to the world of Warhammer, seeing as I don't have a death wish. Instead, today we'll be going over the Primarchs and their legions, discussing their lore, their aesthetics, and anything interesting I can find about them. I warn you now, before you like and subscribe, with 20 legions to cover, this video will be a journey. Not all of you will survive, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make. Before we can start going over the specific legions, we first need to establish what exactly we're talking about. The origins of the Space Marines, or Astartes as they are sometimes referred to, are fairly straightforward, albeit with a myriad of extra details expanding their scope. Starting off, we have the Emperor of Mankind, basically a psychic version of the Giga-Chad that declared himself the ruler of the cosmos, who teams up with a geneticist named Amara Astarte to create a new kind of soldier. Essentially, the plan was to take the Emperor's DNA and use it to create a genetically modified clone referred to as a Primarch. These Primarchs would then be infused with a portion of the Emperor's soul, effectively making them into less powerful versions of him. Then, their genetics would be used to create a gene seed to help convert regular people into genetically enhanced Space Marines. But why not just cram the Emperor's genes into a regular person? What's the point of taking this whole roundabout process just to effectively get the same result, I hear you ask? Well, it's simple, really. For one, the Emperor is so powerful on his own that attempting to pour his essence into a regular person tends to end with them exploding, and besides that, the Emperor realized it was important to have someone other than him to lead his armies while he went and did something more important. Of course, the Emperor wasn't the only one aware of this, and as he finished the project, creating 20 Primarchs in total, the powers of Chaos went and scattered them across the stars. Conjuring a warp storm above Terra, the Chaos Gods sent each Primarch to a distant planet far from the Emperor's reach before they could awaken. Because of this, each Primarch turned out very dissimilar to the others when they were discovered, having been raised under vastly different circumstances. This would eventually be part of the series of events that would give rise to the Horus Heresy, when half of the Primarchs turned traitor and began fighting against the Imperium. That and Erebus. With that covered, we can finally get into the legions themselves, starting out with the First Legion.
It's on site! It is on!
Yeah, piss off.
With Lionel Johnson as their Primarch, the First Legion, known as the Dark Angels, has the distinctive honor of being the template from which all other legions are made. Lionel Johnson, or just the Lion as he is often referred to, exemplifies this best of all as the first Primarch to have been created. You see, in the lore of 40k, each Primarch was created to fulfill a specific role that no other can. And the Lion, as the first of his brothers, was created to be the galaxy's exterminator. The Lion does not simply deal in the wholesale extinction of entire alien species, he erases any evidence that they even existed, until there is nothing left but the dirt his enemies died in. With that preamble out of the way, we can finally ask, who is Lionel Johnson, and where did he come from? Arriving on the semi-feudal world of Caliban, the infant Primarch spent much of his childhood surviving in the hostile forests of his homeworld. An important thing to note about Caliban before we continue is that living there absolutely sucks. Classified as a death world by the Imperium, most of Caliban's surface was covered by dense forests that were home to all sorts of mutated beasts. Growing up in this environment would have a profound effect on the Primarch, even after being discovered by the orders of knights who lived on the planet. Because of this, by the time the Lion was discovered by the Imperium and reintroduced to his legion, Lionel Johnson was a real dick, I'm not gonna lie. His leadership style with the Legion was defined by a rigid pragmatism that carried through until the end of the Horus Heresy. Essentially, the Lion led with the idea that getting the job done was worth any cost, and everyone had their role to play. So, if you were to fail in your duties even once, you would quickly be swept aside and replaced by someone who could do the job better than you. This style of command even extended to how the Legion was organized under the Lion, as rather than following the typical command structure that every other Legion did, the Dark Angels used the hexagrammaton. In layman's terms, where the other legions placed their marines into a number of companies, the Dark Angels organized themselves into 6 wings, each created with a specific purpose in mind. This allowed the Dark Angels to specialize in a number of different fields while still being flexible enough to adapt to any enemy they faced.
How can I be homophobic? I blew his fucking brains out.
There is no second legion, they don't exist, stop asking about it, Asmodai, make them repent! But do you know who will never repent? The Emperor's Children. The 3rd Astartes Legion and our first Traitor Legion. To call the modern-day Emperor's Children a shadow of their former selves, in all honesty, would be giving them too much credit. Of the old Emperor's Children, there is nothing left. No honor, no glory, and as for their Primarch, he's gone even further than that, having turned himself into a living mockery of his former greatness, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's rewind and take a look at where it all started. We open on the distant world of Chemos, an absolute shithole of a world if there ever was one, being a borderline uninhabitable mining planet where the only things to do were work and die. Life on this barren rock was about as dull as you could imagine. That was until the 3rd Legion's Primarch arrived. You see, the thing that separated Fulgrim from the rest of the Primarchs was not any sort of special martial prowess or overt power, but rather how he perceived the world around him. From his time growing up on Chemos onward, Fulgrim had the ability not only to see the potential for perfection in all things, but also the path taken to achieve it. With this and his natural charisma, he was able to vastly improve the quality of life on Chemos for everyone before he was found by the Imperium. Now, with his legion and the other Primarchs, Fulgrim was welcomed into the Imperium and almost immediately disregarded by his brothers. The issue was that due to his focus on perfection, most of the other Primarchs saw him as a pompous and arrogant moron. It didn't help that during the Great Crusade, he would eventually come into possession of a magic sword that was so obviously evil that it began to corrupt his very soul. So when the Horus Heresy started and the heretics came to recruit the Emperor's Children, they were welcomed with open arms, sending the children into a downward spiral from which they could never return.
Honorable battle brother, may I have some bolts? No.
If there was one word to describe the Iron Warriors and their Primarch, bitter would be a good start. Unfortunately, however, the word on its own doesn't even begin to describe the levels of petulant rage within this legion. This is not simply bitter. This is chugging a bottle of lemon juice mixed with black coffee and spoiled milk. This is obliterating your homeworld for disobeying orders that you never even gave them. This is an average day in Europe. That kind of bitter. Growing up on the planet of Olympia, Perturabo was rarely ever shown kindness as he grew, instead being forced to seek brief moments of approval from his surrogate father, one of the many kings of Olympia through military conquest, or through the worship of those beneath him. After having grown up in this kind of environment, it came as no surprise when after Peter Turbo met his legion following a severe loss they had just taken, he immediately sentenced them to decimation, killing 1 in 10 legionaries. Following this, the Iron Warriors operated according to the idea that once they had set themselves to complete a task, they would complete it no matter the cost. As was to be expected with a strategy such as this, the Iron Warriors had one of the highest turnover rates out of all the Space Marine legions. This caused them to be passed up for important duties within the Imperium, which in turn caused them to grow even more bitter and reckless. Over time, this cycle would repeat over and over again until the Horus Heresy kicked off and the Iron Warriors, in their immense bitterness, decided to side with the traitors.
We smoking Serge Ibaka's spinal fluid infused quick release perks.
Out of all the original legions, the White Scars stand out as one of the hardest to discuss for a multitude of reasons. The first, of course, is that they don't get written about that much, and when they do show up, they leave just as quickly as they arrive. The second is that in the lore, they don't really act like other Space Marines. They don't waste time celebrating their victories, and they don't really employ propaganda to any great extent. So to understand the Legion, let's first talk about their Primarch. Growing up on the feudal world of Chigoris, Jagatai Khan was a born warlord, and as a Primarch was the greatest warrior the planet had ever seen. Because of this, he quickly earned the title of the Great Khan for himself, having banded together the tribes around him into a single horde. One interesting thing to note is that, unlike the other warlords on Chigoris, the Khan had a unique approach to conquest that made him very well liked, even by his enemies. In short, after conquering another tribe, rather than killing its leaders and enslaving its people, Jagatai Khan would offer them the chance to live and fight under him as equals, and if they refused, he would just let them go, because what need do you have for slaves when you have the love of the people? After being found by the Emperor and gifted with his legion, he applied this same philosophy to great effect. After introducing the Terran legionaries to the warrior culture of Chigoris, and supplementing them with warriors from his homeworld, the Khan quickly became one of the most well-liked Primarchs. Although at a glance you wouldn't know this because the Khan almost never brags about his own achievements. It's not that he isn't glad about what he or his warriors have accomplished, it's more that he realizes nothing good comes from loudly celebrating his victories, which conceptually makes him one of the most intimidating Primarchs out there, because whilst the other Primarchs like Fulgrim or Gilliman let you know exactly what they're capable of well in advance, Jagatai Khan, through his lack of pompous arrogance, lets nothing slip. So all his enemies know is the sight of white armor and the laughing of killers. I won't lie, I don't really like the Space Wolves all that much. They're not my least favorite legion, but I still don't really like them. Regardless, who exactly are the Space Wolves? They're Vikings. Sometimes they're furries, but for the most part, they're just space Vikings. Led by their Primarch Leman Russ, the Space Wolves are exactly what it says on the box. They are Vikings in space. That's not to say that they lack depth, just ask any of their fans and prepare to be bogged down by an hour of lore explanations, but for the most part, and most certainly in the current setting, they are by far the most Flanderized legion. Starting with their home world, Fenris is a death world similar to Caliban, but much colder. Because of this, the people who lived there became remarkably tough by human standards, as in order to live in such a place, one must be exceptionally hardy. Leman Russ exemplifies this best of all, as even though he's a Primarch, he is generally considered to be the best fighter among his brothers in terms of open combat. Unsurprisingly, his legion mirrors this by charging in with waves of wolf-themed berserkers next to wolf-themed armor, and supported by wolf-themed specialists. All because the biggest effect the Wolf King had on his legion was making everything wolf-themed.
Today, we will discuss how to effectively defend against home invasion. All you need is a 12-gauge shotgun, an M84 flashbang, Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, and a 20,000 kilogram block of solid uranium-235.
Hey, remember how I said the Space Wolves aren't my least favorite legion? Well, now you know why. Out of all the Astartes legions, the Imperial Fists are guilty of the greatest sin in storytelling. They're boring. These guys are the plain white bread of Space Marines. They have no spice. Some people like that. Some people like eating food without seasoning. These people are wrong. Even their Primarch is boring, and the only job of a Primarch is to be interesting. Rogel Dorn is a semi-sapient brick wall of a man who spends nearly all of his time in lore building and defending forts. When he was a child, he was raised to build and defend forts. In the Imperium, he was in charge of building and defending forts. He was so good at building and defending forts that the Emperor put him in charge of building and defending the Imperial Palace. This lasted until after the Horus Heresy when, after getting teased by the Iron Warriors, the Imperial Fists decided to do something other than build and defend a fort by laying siege to Perturabo's fort, a task which they failed so hard at, the Legion was completely decimated, and Dorn himself got so thoroughly obliterated that the only thing left of him was his hand. So from that day on, as the Imperial Fists had experienced the most interesting thing they had done, they swore that they would never do anything but build and defend forts.
Oh, brother, I know it's our duty to serve this Primarch and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?
What can I say about the Night Lords that hasn't already been said? Seriously, these guys are quite possibly one of, if not the most talked about Legion in Warhammer, and one of the most polarizing at that. Let's get one thing out of the way first. The Night Lords are the worst. Not in the same way that the Imperial Fists or the Space Wolves are the worst though. The Night Lords are the worst canonically. They don't operate like any other Space Marine Legion. They use fear tactics. They target the weak. They run away from any fight they can't guarantee victory in. They are not just cowards. They are scum who delight in the terror they cause and celebrate the slaughter of those they deem lesser than themselves. Their Primarch, Conrad Kerr, serves as a living composite of all their worst traits, presenting himself as a paragon of justice whilst broadcasting the screams of his victims for all to hear. Growing up on the anarchy-ridden hive world of Nostromo, the Primarch that would come to be known to many as the Night Haunter subjected the planet's populace to his twisted brand of justice. Unsurprisingly, after the Emperor discovered Kurz and sent him off on the Great Crusade, the populace of Nostromo immediately fell back into anarchy without fear of the Night Haunter. So, as time went on and the Legion began recruiting from Nostromo, their ranks would fill in with criminals and maniacs who wanted nothing more than to revel in the suffering of others. It's no wonder, then, that when the Horus Heresy broke out, the Night Lords eagerly joined the side of the traitors, quickly falling to chaos as they were allowed to do as they pleased without any form of restraint.
What do you call this in English?
A casket.
A coffin. What about this?
Out of the original 18 legions, the Blood Angels stand out as one of the hardest to discuss, at least in a limited format such as this. Being quite possibly the most well-liked legion, and having the most lore besides the Blueberry Boy Scouts of Macragge, the Blood Angels are one of the best legions in the lore, no matter how you slice it. Let's think about it like this. If the Emperor's children are all about the pursuit of perfection, then the Blood Angels are perfection. Not only are they incredible warriors, but they are also artists and poets, and this is all thanks to their Primarch. Sanguinius, the angel, the hero, the Emperor's own perfect little hawk boy, is dead as fuck. Like, extremely, incredibly, undeniably dead. Horus murked this man so hard, in fact, that being dead is the main thing he's known for in the lore. So, aside from dying hard enough to give his entire legion anger issues so potent that they're treated like a terminal illness, what is Sanguinius known for? Well, first off, he's perfect. Yeah, it's even stated multiple times in the lore that he is perfect. As a result of this, a lot of the stories about Sanguinius are more concerned with the perspectives of those around him, rather than how he sees things in order to preserve this look of perfection. Growing up on the irradiated hellscape known as Baal, a young Sanguinius quickly ended up developing a pretty severe mutation in the form of a pair of massive angel wings sprouting from his back. Needless to say, when the people of Baal found this Primarch with angel wings, they wasted no time in declaring him king of the world. Surprisingly enough, by the time the Emperor had found Sanguinius, he'd actually managed to handle the situation fairly well, ruling over the world as best he could, and helping to make the place actually livable. Once given his legion, the Angel immediately went about introducing them to the arts and elevating them past the level of just killing their enemies as violently as possible. You know, before getting strangled to death by his big brother.
Time to do some sketchy shit. Doo-dah, doo-dah. Hope I get away with it. Oh, the doo-dah days.
The Iron Hands are a weird legion to talk about, as they are quite possibly the least well known of them all. Unlike the White Scars, who are specifically hard to get a read on as an aspect of their lore, the Iron Hands aren't really talked about due to the odd position they occupy. The important thing to note is that the Iron Hands are considered to be one of the most brutal of the Space Marine legions due to the Darwinistic philosophy they follow. To the Iron Hands, it's not enough to simply be the best at something. You need to be better at it than you were the last time you tried. It doesn't matter if you're a superhuman Space Marine or a bog standard guardsman. If you aren't improving, then you aren't worth the rations it takes to feed you. This draconian belief is something they get from their Primarch Ferrus Manus, a man so callous, so ferocious, so ugly that he's actually called the Gorgon of Medusa. As you might expect, the planet of Medusa sucks and is ruled by survival of the fittest. Unsurprisingly, as a Primarch, Ferrus Manus excelled in this environment, becoming the single most powerful warlord on the planet, even going as far as to square up with a Catan shard, which ended up with him struggling with it in a pool of molten metal and getting his hands encrusted in necrodermis. Once he was introduced to his legion, Ferrus Manus almost immediately declared that they were to fall in line with the culture of Medusa. To this end, he engaged in a program of what was effectively industrial-scale nepotism, replacing the experienced Terran-born leadership of the Legion with new Medusan recruits. As a result of this, the Legion ended up taking on an even more hyperbolic version of the Primarchs' beliefs, deciding that the best way to improve themselves was to replace their flesh with steel. This would set them on a path that would soon become inexorable as Ferrus Manus became the first Primarch to die in the Horus Heresy.
Caught a broke boy trying to come up on my Amazon package, so I skinned his ass alive. Ah!
Okay, you already know what the World Eaters are all about. Even if you're new to Warhammer, most people can figure out the World Eaters within a few minutes of seeing them. They're the Angry Marines. They quite literally have a device implanted in their skulls that tortures them whenever they aren't feeling blood-curdling rage. What makes them interesting is the fact that they weren't always like this. Starting with their Primarch, Angron's upbringing was vastly different from those of his brothers, as when he arrived on New Syria, he was almost immediately enslaved and sent to fight in the gladiator pits of the world. Unsurprisingly, Angron was very good at this, remaining undefeated throughout his entire gladiatorial career. That was until one day when he was ordered to kill someone very close to him and decided to defy his enslavers. In response, he was promptly sedated and wired up with the device known as the Butcher's Nails, before being let back into the ring to kill his friend. Following this, he led an uprising among the other slaves, which went about as well as you could imagine, but before Angron could die in battle, the Emperor came down from the heavens to save his lost son, and nobody else. An important thing to note before getting into the effect Angron had on his legion is the fact that he never wanted to be part of the Imperium. Angron, after being saved from his death in battle, hated the Emperor and the Imperium, and wanted nothing to do with him or the legion he had been given. So when he took command of his legion, Angron ended up implementing a number of rules which mainly served as excuses to kill his own legionaries and force them to take on the Butcher's Nails. Now, in the modern setting of 40k, the World Eaters are a Chaos Space Marine Legion in service to Khorne, and they've never been angrier.
Love me, Emperor. Love me, Primarch. Love me, Chapter. 8 traitors. 8 orcs, not racist, I just don't like them. 8 heretics. Simple as.
Here it is, the moment some of you have been waiting for. The part of the video where the funny internet man talks about the Ultramarines. So, first things first, who are the Ultramarines? In short, they are the Space Mariniest Space Marines to have ever Space Marined. Yeah, in case you couldn't tell, the Ultramarines are kind of the default Space Marines. They specialize in being decent at almost everything, but not excellent at any one thing. This makes it so that they can be pretty boring on their own, but at the same time they also win a lot, so if you don't like the Ultramarines then you really don't like the Ultramarines. This aspect of being a jack of all trades in the lore comes from their Primarch, Rowboat Guilliman, who somehow manages to flip-flop between being both the best and worst written character in the lore. Growing up on the definitely not ancient Greece planet of Macragge, Rowboat Guilliman would make a name for himself as he managed to colonize a huge swath of the galaxy through the power of sheer bureaucracy. This impressed the Emperor so much that he allowed the region of space known as Ultramar to maintain its culture and heritage as it became part of the Imperium. Now, you might be thinking that after being found by the Emperor, Guilliman might have to step away from Ultramar to participate in the Great Crusade, and that he might even be gone long enough for something interesting to happen. Banish these thoughts, fool! For you have failed to account for the fact that Robotic Guilliman has the power of bureaucracy on his side, rendering him capable of leading his branch of the Crusade from the comfort of his own home most of the time. And that brings us to the modern setting of 40k. And after 10,000 years of war, how have the Ultramarines changed? Well, they haven't. They are ostensibly still the same Blueberry Boy Scouts that they've always been. The only tangible differences there is between the pre- and post-Heresy Ultramarines is that after Guilliman wrote his big book of rules, there's a lot less of them running around these days. That is, if you gloss over the fact that they have produced by far the most successor chapters out of all the legions, most of which are just more Ultramarines with the serial numbers filed off.
I can feel the fungi munching on my brain. I'm sick! Ah! The worms! The worms!
I'll be honest. I'm not all too familiar with the Death Guard as a legion. So, this part of the video will mainly be my own interpretation of their lore. So, if something I say here turns out to be wrong, simply convince yourself that it wasn't. Starting with the pre-Heresy Legion, we first need to go back and look at how all the legions are organized. One thing you'll notice when looking over the legions is that most have some sort of specialty that the others don't, most of which we've already gone over. Which begs the question, what's the specialty of the Death Guard? War crimes. Just so many war crimes. An unreasonable amount of war crimes, committed on a regular basis. As you can imagine, this particular tactic is one they got from their Primarch Mortarion. Where do I even start with Mortarion? This is a man with such a massive chip off his shoulder that his arm is on the verge of falling off. Growing up on the planet of Barbarous, Morty was initially raised by a race of Xenos which might have been Chaos corrupted, before realizing that he was actually a human, albeit a huge genetically modified demigod human. So, banded together with the small handful of human settlements on the planet, Mortarion swore that he would be the one to kill his shitty Xenos dad, at which point one of the random humans under his command said something along the lines of, "I bet." A challenge that got so deep under this Primarch's skin that he sent himself on a one-man death march up Poison Mountain so that he could personally get himself killed. Needless to say, Mortarion failed, at which point the random human revealed himself to be the Emperor of Mankind before killing his dad. You know, the guy he swore that no one else in existence was allowed to kill? Yeah, the Emperor just obliterated him with no effort after watching Mortarion nearly die trying. Now, would you believe me when I say this made Mortarion, a man already bitter enough to swear death on his own father, just a bit angry? Because things would only get worse as the Great Crusade went on, with the Emperor getting onto him for his near-constant war crimes and his hatred of psychers. Speaking of Mortarion-hating nerds, during the Great Crusade, this absolute legend hated psychers so much that he spent the time and effort to go through the proper channels to organize the Council of Nicaea, which was effectively a galactic-scale witch hunt and trial that allowed Mortarion to dedicate an obscene amount of Crusade resources to the pursuit of killing his own brother. Needless to say, once the Horus Heresy rolled around, all it took to get Mortarion to turn traitor was a little convincing and his first captain turning into a semi-sentient beehive.
Father, the Corpse Emperor, my father!
Magnus the Red did everything wrong. If you are someone of the opinion that Magnus and the Thousand Sons are just a bunch of sad wizard boys deserving of your sympathy, you are also wrong. I say this because in the lore of 40k, the Thousand Sons are oftentimes written around the two concepts of Hanlon's Razor and Clark's Law. In essence, Hanlon's Razor dictates that one should never attribute malice to that which can be explained by stupidity, whereas Clark's Law dictates that sufficiently advanced incompetence is indistinguishable from malice. I tell you this to help illustrate the point that Magnus the Red, one of the all-time smartest characters in Warhammer, is a complete irredeemable idiot. Starting with his childhood, Magnus grew up on the planet known as Prospero, a luxurious paradise world, populated by nerds of all shapes and sizes. Magnus, being the biggest nerd of them all, quickly discovered that on top of being a Primarch, he also held great psychic potential within himself that far exceeded anyone else around him. Unsurprisingly, this caused Magnus to develop a remarkable ego during his many years spent studying before the Emperor found him. After being discovered by the Imperium and reunited with his legion, Magnus would continue to grow his ego as he participated in the Great Crusade, starting by being the only Primarch capable of wielding true psychic powers. Magnus was off to a great start when it came to massively overestimating his abilities. This overconfidence would eventually lead him to take a field trip through the warp, which ended with him getting duped by Tzeentch into giving up one of his eyes and psychically invading the Imperial Palace, which turned out to be an act so profoundly stupid that it would set into motion a course of events that would end with the burning of Prospero and Magnus vowing allegiance to Tzeentch. Because even after everything he went through, Magnus the Red was still too stupid to learn his fucking lesson.
No, it cannot be.
That is impossible! Is that standing behind?
Fucking Horus!
From the Luna Wolves, to the Sons of Horus, to the Black Legion, to quite possibly the biggest unintentional joke in the setting. Whatever you want to call them, this legion can oftentimes stand out as one of, if not the most difficult to discuss, on account of they're them. They're the bad guys. These guys are the Sons of Horus from the Horus Heresy. They are the original traitor legion. They're the ones who said, "Let the galaxy burn." These guys are so cartoonishly evil that even the other Chaos factions can't help but see most of them as a complete joke. But they weren't always the 40k equivalent to Team Rocket, so let's take a look back to see how they got here. Needless to say, Horus Lupercal is what most people would refer to as something of a complex character. As he was the first Primarch to be found by the Emperor, Horus would spend most of his life being pushed into the role of someone of great importance. To say Horus got special treatment from the Emperor wouldn't be entirely false, as even within the lore, it's a well-known fact that Horus is the Emperor's favorite. Of course, this is the Emperor we're talking about, which means that the special treatment Horus got most of the time was being sent off to fight the Emperor's hardest battles, and getting told to lead the Great Crusade while he got bored of it. Understandably, having the entire weight of human civilization placed on his shoulders caused Horus to stress out a little, which came to a head when he and the Luna Wolves came across the Interrex and tried to negotiate a peaceful way to bring them into the Imperium. A course of action that would end up going horribly wrong, as that rat bastard Erebus stole their magical fuck you sword and used it to shank Horus with the power of heresy, thus dooming everyone, himself included, to the grimdark future of the modern setting of 40k. So let's move forward into 40k to see how the Black Legion is doing after the Horus Heresy. Well, first things first, Horus is dead. And when I say dead here, I don't just mean dead. When I say Horus is dead, I mean that once the Emperor got to this man, he didn't just stop at obliterating his body. The Emperor, with the magical fuck you sword still lodged in his chest cavity, went into the warp just to psychically murder Horus's soul to make sure he is never coming back. Sanguinius has a better chance at resurrecting than this man. As for the Black Legion, things have been pretty consistently shit for them following the end of the heresy. Most of the other Chaos Legions view them as a bunch of short-sighted fools too hell-bent on revenge to get anything done, and they themselves have only recently managed to make any progress towards burning Terra with Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. But hey, at least they have the blessings of all 4 Chaos Gods, although that point does get soured a little once you realize who they share that honor with.
The Bible. This is the Bible. You question the words of the mighty Jimmy?
Oh, you do not understand the kind of restraint it has taken to avoid making half of this video just the fuck Erebus power hour. So, who are the Word Bearers? In short, they are the absolute worst. Pretty much all of humanity's problems during and after the Horus Heresy can in some way be traced back to the Word Bearers doing something they weren't supposed to. Starting with that bastard Erebus, the Word Bearers were the first of the Astartes legions to fall to chaos after getting humbled by the Emperor. You see, the Word Bearers, and especially their Primarch Lorgar, are zealots, who were taught by their Primarch that the Emperor of Mankind is actually a god and should be worshipped as such. A notion that the Emperor was so vehemently against that in order to prove he wasn't a god, he had the Word Bearers' home planet decimated and reconquered by the Ultramarines. Now, as for how the Word Bearers got to this point, we can look to their Primarch, Lorgar Aurelian. All of this is his fault. I dog on Erebus a lot, and he absolutely deserves it, but in all honesty, chances are he wouldn't have done any of the messed up stuff he did if it weren't for Lorgar. You see, Lorgar Aurelian is a pious man who once believed that the universe was to be ruled by a single all-powerful god. A belief that was only further reinforced when the Emperor came down to his home planet of Colchis in a golden spaceship and radiated an immensely powerful psychic aura. As you could imagine, Lorgar then proceeded to ignore the Emperor's repeated assertions that he was not in fact a god, before going ahead and writing the 40k equivalent to the Bible. After the destruction of both Colchis and his faith, Lorgar would be approached by his legionary Erebus, who had recently discovered something about the warp. You see, just because the Emperor isn't a god, doesn't mean there aren't gods out there. And unlike the Emperor, these ones actually appreciate worship. And so, like the rat bastard he is, Erebus was able to convert Lorgar and the Word Bearers into the single most zealous Chaos worshippers in the galaxy. Nowadays, they're doing pretty much exactly what you'd expect. The Legion itself is going around doing the bidding of Chaos without a care in the world. Lorgar is repeatedly getting his teeth kicked in by the rage-fueled warp ghost of Chorus Corax, and Erebus is currently trying to put as much distance between himself and Karn the Betrayer as possible after getting pulverized by him.
Assuming that you have not been lacking, you should easily be able to replicate the compression effects of a chemically fueled implosion assembly nuclear weapon explosive lens with your bare hands.
One thing that gets brought up in the lore of 40k and discussions surrounding it is the question of how do Space Marines view the rest of humanity? Obviously they exist to protect humanity, but that doesn't answer the question of how the Astartes themselves actually perceive the people they're saving. So how do Space Marines view Imperial citizens? In short, not very well. For the most part, Space Marines tend to view Imperial citizens, and even guardsmen to a certain extent, as little more than distractions to their work. And there are even a few who will go out of their way to kill those humans when they feel like it. What sets the Salamanders apart is the fact that, unlike most other Space Marines, they actually go out of their way to save as many people as possible as quickly as they can. Growing up on the planet of Nocturne, the Primarch of the Salamanders, Vulcan, quickly made a name for himself as a master of the Forge on top of being an absolute giant. Seriously, look at this dude, he's huge even by Primarch standards. While we're on the topic of Vulcan's appearance, you might have noticed that both Vulcan and the Salamanders look rather strange when sat next to some of the other Space Marines. This is due to a side effect of growing up on Nocturne. Due to the massive amounts of volcanic ash blocking out the light of the sun, the people of Nocturne quickly develop a complexion consisting of charcoal black skin and glowing red eyes. How is this supposed to work out scientifically is a mystery to me, so I'm just going to assume that it's something to do with warp magic. Aside from that, there isn't really much to talk about on this front. Vulcan had an alright childhood surrounded by people he loved who instilled good values into him. No wonder he turned out better than any of his brothers. As for how the Salamanders operate in the modern day, after Vulcan died for like the 5th time, don't worry, he does that a lot, the Salamanders have dedicated themselves to retrieving Vulcan's stuff. It is the widespread and quite possibly baseless belief of the Salamanders that if they're able to retrieve all of the artifacts of Vulcan, then he will return to him. How he'll be able to do that after getting incinerated by the overloading core of an orc Gargant is beyond me, but hey, the Salamanders have never been renowned for the quality of their writing.
Stay frosty. Cheers, big fella. Are we rushing in, or are we going sneaky beaky like?
I'll admit I have something of a love-hate relationship with the Raven Guard. On one hand, their Primarch is one of the best written characters in the setting of Warhammer 40k. On the other hand, the Raven Guard themselves are one of the most poorly written groups in the lore. This leads to an interesting situation where some people, mostly Raven Guard fans, love reading the lore, whereas most other people see the early 2000s emo aesthetic and get immediately turned off. As for the lore of the Raven Guard, these Space Marines are the elite stealth troops of the Astartes. Now, before you go and say how silly it is, I'd encourage you to think about how hard it would be to sneak around wearing armor that weighs the same as an actual car. And don't forget that these Space Marines are also perfectly capable of taking off that armor whenever it suits them. Moving on to the best part of the Raven Guard, their Primarch, Corvus Corax, grew up hidden on the moon of a planet called Kievar. The moon, which would later come to be known as Deliverance, housed most of the planet's enslaved workforce in a massive prison colony, where Corax grew up. During this time, Corax would lead a prisoner revolt on the moon, managing to conquer and rename it before strong-arming the Kievarans into giving him and his people their freedom. Not long afterwards, he would be discovered by the Imperium and reunited with his legion. It's at this point that I'd also like to bring up an interesting detail in the fact that he was the only one of the Primarchs who didn't really like Horus. You see, not long after he was discovered, Corvus Corax found himself fighting beside Horus and the Luna Wolves during the Great Crusade. During one of the battles fought in this campaign, Horus gave the order for the Raven Guard to lead with a head-on charge. a task which the light armored stealth troops weren't exactly suited for. But when Corvus Corax pointed this out to Horus, he simply decided to force the Raven Guard into doing it anyways, which predictably ended with the vast majority of them dying in battle. After this, Corvus Corax came to the realization that, despite the opinions of the Emperor and the rest of the Primarchs, Horus, even before he was granted the title of War Master, was completely insane. Nowadays, with the absence of their Primarch, the Raven Guard are struggling to do what they can to stay interesting, seeing as their relevance to the lore left them a long time ago. As you may remember from the section on the Word Bearers following the end of the Horus Heresy, Corvus Corax had developed such a deep-seated hatred for Lorgar that the moment he got the chance, he sailed straight into the Eye of Terror with the sole purpose of kicking the shit out of him. A goal which he was so aggressively dedicated to that his soul became suffused with warp energies, and he ascended to the level of a greater demon, not in service of any of the Chaos Gods, but with a single purpose so all-consuming that not even all the chaos magic in the warp could hold him back from eternally eviscerating that choir boy's soul.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
Finally, last but not least, we have my personal favorite Legion, the Alpha Legion. As you might expect for the last Legion on the list, the Alpha Legion are something of an antithesis to the other Legions. Whereas the other legions are dedicated to conducting all-out war on their foes, involving battle lines, fleet movements, and stealth operations, the Alpha Legions center their focus on the more covert aspects of warfare, using sleeper cells, misinformation, and assassinations to achieve their ends. Because of this, the Alpha Legionnaires are often looked down upon by the other legions, who perceive their way of war as dishonorable. A stigma that isn't helped by the fact that the Alpha Legion also go out of their way to deceive and spy on the other legions of Space Marines. Even Robute Gilliman, massive bureaucrat that he is, once referred to an Alpha Legion operation as a waste of the Emperor's bolt shells. Starting with their Primarch, Alfarius Omegon, we immediately get to see the kind of grip the Alpha Legion hold on the information surrounding them. You see, when I refer to the Alpha Legion's Primarch as Alfarius Omegon, that was a lie. For you see, the Alpha Legion has not one, but two Primarchs named Alfarius and Omegon. A secret which not even the Emperor of Mankind is aware of. And this is made easier to keep due to the fact that most of the Alpha Legionnaires also look identical to their Primarchs. As for the origins of the two Primarchs, one was sent off to a distant trash can of a planet currently under invasion by humanoid worm xenos things called the Sloth, and the other was simply dropped back on Terra because Zinch fumbled the pitch or something. This also means that Horus, being the first Primarch to be found by the Emperor, was also a lie. As for how you're supposed to figure out which is which, good luck, dude. As for where the Alpha Legion is in the current day, the answer, like most things regarding the Alpha Legion, is muddled, confusing, and quite possibly a lie. During the events of the Horus Heresy, the Alpha Legion turned traitor against the Imperium and turned out to be instrumental during the Battle of Pluto, where Alfarius unfortunately died at the hands of Rogal Dorn. After this, they would then proceed to sit out the Battle of Terra for whatever reason, and after the traitors were beaten back, they splintered into hundreds of sleeper cells all throughout the Imperium. Except that was all a lie, because the Alpha Legion was actually loyalists the whole time and were in fact sabotaging the heretics to ruin any chances of them winning the Battle of Terra. But that's only part of the truth, because after Alfarius, who was actually Omegon pretending to be Alfarius, died at the Battle of Pluto, most of the Alpha Legionnaires decided they didn't want to fight for the Imperium that had just killed one of their Primarchs, and so turned traitor for real this time. Some of these traitor Alpha Legionnaires even went as far as to join Chaos, splitting the Alpha Legion into 3 different groups. So now, you have the Loyalist Alpha Legion, the Chaos Alpha Legion, and the Renegade Ghost Legion, which are just more Alpha Legionnaires with the serial numbers filed off. That's right, it's all Alpha Legion all the way down. All the lore you thought you knew, the timeline of the setting, this video, oops, all Alpha Legion. And just like that, we've covered all 18 Space Marine Legions. If anyone told you this would be a quick process, you now have the right to beat them like Karn beating Erebus, after slogging through this monolith of a video. Now, as is the fate of all Warhammer videos, I had to leave out an obscene amount of lore pertaining to each individual legion. So if you want to see me cover them in more detail, or talk about something else entirely, make sure to leave a comment listing your demands. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you like me, and tune in next time to see what will cause my next mental breakdown.